Well, welcome everyone to the Personalized Learning webinar series. This is Kathleen McClaskey, and Barbara Bray and I are co-founders of Personalized Learning, and we are so excited to have Kathleen Cushman here to present the motivation equation. And Kathleen said that you can download that on your iPad, and you can also take a look at it online. But we also want to thank, by the way, Classroom 2.0, Steve Hargadon and Peggy George, who are sponsoring and has supported this, has given this wonderful room for us to present this webinar series. So welcome everyone. Now, Kathleen Cushman is going to present a pretty exciting set of information on motivation, and you're actually going to hear kids talking about their learning in some really wonderful audio files. So Kathleen, you're on.
Okay, well, I'm happy to be here. Thanks. I'm really delighted that all of you, whether you're in sunny climates or blizzard climates, as I am, have taken the time this afternoon to be here and meet me. And I'd like to pose a question that's going to drive our time together, which is, what is it that makes kids want to learn? And we're going to draw a straight line today between, number one, what young people tell us about their learning experiences when we listen closely, and number two, your own practice as educators, and number three, the scientific research into mind, brain, and education that has really exploded in the last couple of decades, and seems like more interesting research comes out every day. And that's been my work for what kids can do, to look into that issue of young people's motivation and their mastery, to connect them and to connect all of that with what educators do in the classroom and with what scientists say about how learning happens. So the students and I have boiled down what we've learned to 8 simple rules of thumb that help teachers create the conditions for high motivation and high levels of mastery in your learning environment. So that's what we're going to touch on today in an hour, and really it's a very rich and deep subject, and to do it justice takes really a whole day of workshop, which I do often with teachers, and at the end of it we still wish we had more time. So this will just be a little taste of what we're doing. So maybe the next slide at this point. So I'd like you all to start by thinking not about your students, but thinking about an example from your own teaching, not about what's wrong with your teaching or what's wrong with your students, but just describe in the chat a student or a group of students you taught whose motivation levels you were thinking got in the way of their learning. So I'd love to have you just describe briefly in the chat what that looked like from your perspective, how the scenario played out from your perspective. So if you're in the chat, you might be describing, for example, a time when the students were putting their heads down on their desk, or when you assigned something and nobody did it. Just tell me what the problem was for you, because I think before we talk about any solutions, we want to talk about what it is that's presenting. So this is your time to do that for a few minutes. Just a minute or so, really. Can't tell if that's happening or not.
Kathleen, can you see it in the chat?
Yes, now I can see. Thanks very much. So looking at it from your perspective, I mean, I wish I could actually hear people's voices to tell their stories. Sometimes it's a little hard to describe these things. But Barbara Bray, would you like to describe something that you've witnessed that a situation that felt like a low motivation situation that bothered you?
Well, one of my jobs is to come in and observe and then talk and interview students, and I just remember several kids saying that they didn't see any reason why to go to school. They felt like they were learning more outside of school, and that was middle schoolers. So I don't know if that's, and then another situation was some kids who just basically, like you said, put their heads down, and it was engaging. The teacher was working really, really hard, but the kids just didn't seem engaged at all. And the teacher was really frustrated, thinking, I'm working, I don't know what to do.
Good, good. So I see some other things in the chat that some people are saying if they're listening only, if they have no opportunity for, Peggy says, for participation, sort of the Ferris-Bueller's syndrome. Anyone, all bored and tuned out? Yeah, that seems to be what makes teachers greet me at my workshops by saying, our students, I can't do anything with them. They're so apathetic. They just don't care. And yet we all know that we see students when they get out of school and how immediately they start to come alive, and whatever they're doing out of school really matters to them. So that is the problem. I want to frame the problem before we go on to the ideas that we're going to be talking about. So let's go to the next slide and ask the question of what you yourself have been motivated by. Let's just think about your own personal experience. Whatever has motivated you to take up something that's kind of hard in some period of your life. It doesn't have to be at school. And there in the chat, just write some of your notes of some of the things that might have made you want to try something. So perhaps, for example, it looked like fun. And maybe it seemed like something that you could probably do and wouldn't fall flat on your face with. Maybe that would be it. Maybe it involved peers that you wanted to be with. It always helps me when success doesn't all depend on me, and certainly Barbara and Kathleen McCraskey know that well. If it all depended on me, it probably wouldn't be a success, so I'm not very motivated to try. So it also really helps if nobody is going to be judging me, so the stakes are kind of low. At the same time, it might be that you're interested in trying it because somebody is there for you, somebody's supporting you, somebody's encouraging you at the start. They might be breaking it down into steps. They might be doing it with you, as Barbara Bray did so nicely before we got on this webinar. They might be praising your little tiny successes to make you feel like, oh, I did something right anyway. And they also could be showing you how to do better at it. That helps a lot. Now, another thing that draws me in that might apply to you is the activity might have an audience that matters to you. For example, you matter to me today, and so even despite really kind of a difficult start, I was really eager to talk to you. So that kept me wanting to do it, even though it was kind of hard. So that audience could be at work, like this one, or at school for your students, or for yourself if you're at school. It could also be an audience among your friends or your family. Maybe the audience is the people that you play tennis with, and you want to, you want to make yourself proud with them. It could also be in a public setting, if you're speaking somewhere, if you're presenting, if you're doing something in front of people that you don't know. There is also the personal interest that you bring to wanting to do something. It may be just as some of you have said, to just express yourself, the creative drive to say something or do something that feels really to be you that you identify with and feels like if you can do this, you're really being yourself. Or even if you're not that self yet, that you might grow into that self. So I mean, I've always wanted to learn how to tap dance, and I don't tap dance, and I, once in my 40s took a little lesson or two, but it's always been something that if somebody came along and said, let me show you this, I'd be excited to try to learn it once again. And finally, there's a certain amount of motivation that comes from just feeling the pleasure of mastering new challenges, just that feeling that, yes, I got it. I got it. It works. I can kind of do it. So those are the kinds of things that it's most useful to talk about in your own experience before you start thinking about students that you're working with. So now let's go on to the next slide and think a little bit about students, because we have some beginning data to work with now, really to help answer our question. What makes us want to take on a deeper learning challenge? That's our question, a real learning challenge. So far, the data that we've looked at come from our own perspective. First, it came from your perspective as a teacher, and second, it came from your perspective as a learner. But of course, we also need some information from the young people that we teach. So here's where I'm going to introduce you to some kids. So, yes, let's pull up the next slide, if we will. And this is Jason. And I'm just going to play what Jason is saying. Okay. By the way, you can move that white square away. So first I want to ask if you could hear that all right. Could you please indicate in some way, and maybe the other moderators can say how they should indicate, if you could hear Jason talking? Everybody's hearing all right? So now I'd like to ask you, what do you think worries Jason? What does make Jason feel okay at school? And just to review, what he said here is that he wasn't from what you would call the best neighborhood. And he worries about such simple things as taking the bus home from school. So right, he's interested in confidentiality. He's interested in safety. He needs to be safe from physical harm on the bus, and he has to have trust with the people that he's with at school. So in his case, he has an advisory meeting, and they call it crew because he's in an expeditionary learning school, and that's what they call their advisories. And yeah, positive peer group. He has a positive peer group in that advisory. And Peggy says he's having no pressure in the after-school time. This is a student, I know him, and he stays at school because he doesn't want to go home. And mostly he doesn't want to go home because the bus is pretty dangerous for him. He has to go home to a rough neighborhood, and the city bus is a place that kids get harassed, beaten up. And so he sticks around at school, and he doesn't feel that he has to limit himself to what he's saying there. He can be himself. It's true. In some places like this, school is the only safe place. So what we're hearing here is it relates to the things that we were talking about when we were talking about why you yourself are willing to take up something new and difficult. I mean, it's clear that you can hear in Jason's voice that he's uncomfortable in some ways. He's kind of got this tension in his voice, but when he talks about his crew, he loosens up a little bit. He says, nobody's going to say anything to you. Nobody's going to say anything that you said not to say. What's said in crew, he says, stays in crew. It's more of a thing like where you can like say things. You have that mutual trust. So a lot of those same things were true when you were talking about your own reasons for wanting to start something. Somebody was encouraging you. People praised your small successes. Nobody was particularly judging you. So it involved peers that you wanted to be with. It seemed like you could do something. And in all those things are creating a condition in which Jason feels comfortable being at school. It's the primary condition that science says has got to be present in order for any organism to learn. And I had to laugh when I was working with the learning scientists in San Diego for on the book, The Motivation Equation, because the learning scientists would say the organism will not learn if it's threatened. It will not learn if it's humiliated. It goes into fight or flight mode, and you will not be learning during that time. So that's why I started with Jason, because he reminds us that if you're not okay, if you don't feel okay, nothing else of the learning is going to happen. So that was our number one condition. Let's move on to Amanda, who's going to be our next student, and listen to what she says about a project that her science class took on. If you don't mind, just when the audio comes on, you'll be that picture of Amanda will be covered by a white square. If you'd rather look at Amanda, just grab that white square at the grab bar at the top and just move it out of the way on your computer, and then you'll be able to watch Amanda, which is kind of fun to do. There's just also a video if you want to look it up. So you could hear Amanda okay on that? So tell me what you think mattered here to Amanda about this project, because part of wanting to do something is that it matters to you. So what do you think it mattered? It's a kind of a complicated story. She felt a connection to the topic. Yeah, she had self-esteem, personally connected. What made her personally connected? Kilkenny says yes, gave her a common interest with her dad. Interesting, because she didn't even know she was interested until she started. And she wasn't interested. She tells us right out, I wasn't interested. But then something else got her interested, not just her dad. She said, I didn't care about cars because I usually take the train. But once we started to learn that mostly everything you use uses oil and we're going to run out, then that was kind of a draw for her. How's the economy going to be affected? How's everybody else going to be affected? But she didn't see it as that. She says, I didn't see it as that when I first entered. I just saw it as, oh, I'm learning about cars. But then she started talking to her dad about it. Right. So if you start out knowing about cars, absolutely. I interviewed kids who teach themselves to read by reading car manuals, just like Peggy just noticed. Yeah. But the interesting thing was, it was an eye-opener to Amanda. And it also had this, that's why it's such a rich example, that not only was it something that mattered to her eventually as she kind of got into it, and I saw how she was going to be affected, but it also had this emotional component with her dad. You outsmarted me, but okay, he said. She'd love to outsmart her dad. And yeah, and I'm sure that Dad did love teaching her about it. So that was an interesting condition that we have. It's one of the conditions that we drew out of the hundreds and hundreds of students that I've talked with about what matters, what makes them want to learn. The first one is I have to feel okay. The second one is it matters. And as you see, it can matter in all kinds of ways. If it doesn't matter, forget it. But it doesn't have to matter for the same reasons. We've just seen two.
Kathleen,
why don't we
can
move
I
on
just have you stop
to,
for a minute? Because
yes.
Just about this
Sure.
one on It Matters, what I heard in her voice was something really powerful, but this is where reflection is really important. And sometimes this happens to kids and the teacher's not even aware of it. Is there a part of reflection that's where, that could help teachers?
One of our 8 conditions is I look back on it, I think back on it, and it's all about reflection, and it's the 7th of the 8 conditions. We won't hear somebody talking about it today because we don't have room for time for 8 students to talk, but absolutely you couldn't be more right that really one doesn't learn until one does reflect back on it. And she was making that bigger connection, the connection to the bigger picture, and she did think about how it affected her relationship. And that's where the real learning went on. It's a wonderful point, Barbara. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
So if we're ready, we can move on to Miranda. And Miranda took a course that it was a course that her teachers made up, and they called it an anthropology course. And I'll let her tell you about it, but we'll listen to what was so great that made her want to be involved in this course. Let's go for Miranda. So Miranda, as you just heard, got to do a whole course on what it's like to be 16. And they did a lot of things. The kids went and they Skyped people all over the world. They found other classes and they talked to 16-year-olds in India and Africa and Australia and debriefed them on what life as a 16-year-old was like for them. And in her kind of struggling way, she tries to articulate that, that in any area with being 16, sports, she's talking about some of the people that they talk to, relationships. One of her classmates told me that they talked to a young man in Africa who told about how in order to, at the age of 16, his tribal ritual was to jump up and down as long and high as you could, and the one who did it the longest would win the bride that was the bride of the day, and he was just completely blown away with that. So for Miranda, the big thing was dim sum. Right. It was interesting that he used the term authenticity because they were learning that when something that's authentic to one person was not necessarily authentic to another person. And as she says, it rid us of our biases. But another thing they did was they went out for Chinese food in New York to a dim sum place, and they had chicken feet. As she says, that was one of the main things that really stuck out to people. Well, what does that sound like to you? When something is authentic, then we connect to it, Barbara says. So what I'm thinking is that each student in this class got a chance to really connect with other people on a subject that actually mattered to them. It's just like Amanda's condition, it mattered. But also they really got to actively do something with it and think about what they were doing and analyze what they were doing. Whether it was talking to a person in another country or whether it was analyzing their own experience of being 16 in a different setting. And they were learning how to become anthropologists. Hosting a dim pump, this is a great idea. I am also ignorant of dim sum. I'm not a noodle person, and I was surprised to hear that chicken feet was part of the banquet. So this is the third of the conditions that I'm introducing as part of the 8 essential learning conditions. You don't learn when you're passive. That's the essence of this, and science backs this up. In order for you to actually be learning, you have to build on something that's already in your mental models, that you already think. So Miranda had a mental model of what it was like to be a 16-year-old, and her teacher was building on that model by having the class go and talk to other 16-year-olds in other settings. She had a mental model of what tasted good to eat, and chicken feet wasn't in that model, but trying it was something that stretched her model and made her think from another perspective about not only what it's like being 16, but what makes a food delicious to you. Well, that's a cultural thing, and she's learning to think like an anthropologist. That wouldn't have happened if the teacher hadn't created something active for the students to do. Now, just in the chat for a minute, describe what you mean by active. Does it really mean that you have to go out to a Chinese restaurant with your kids? Not passive, trying, stretching, thinking from another perspective. Take them out for rattlesnake appetizers. That's great. That's great. So it can be, and kids do love it when it's something that gets them on their feet, something physical, something that gets them talking to people they wouldn't otherwise get to talk to. And that can be by Skype, or it can be interviewing people in an old person's home, or it can be interviewing their tattoo artist, anything that can connect to the point that you're trying to make. People in math can make things active in all kinds of ways by taking them outside the school and measuring the angles of the roof to the ground, to the building walls. And any subject can do this, but doing something with the material rather than receiving the material is the essence of its active. So I'd like to move on to the 4th student, because otherwise we'll run out of time. And this is for Sean. And let's listen to Rashawn. So Rashawn is talking about our fourth condition for real learning, motivated learning, and mastery, which is that it stretches you. And kids know, I mean, one reason kids are passive and bored is that if something doesn't stretch you, then you don't care about it. And curiosity arises if you don't know something. It doesn't work if it's too far of a stretch, and that's what Rashawn was playing with in as he talked about his music coach, his band coach, because his teacher, he didn't agree with what his teacher thought he could reach. He said, "No, I can't push. That note's too high." And he said, his teacher said, "It's well within your range." But the stretching has to be seen as a positive thing, something that you can master. And this is why I call the book The Motivation Equation, because there are two essential conditions that have to be there. They both have to be there if we're ever going to want to do something or to learn something. And those conditions, which have been well established in the research for decades, is number one, you've got to value it somehow. It's got to matter somehow to you. And number two, you have to be able to, you the learner have to expect that if you try, you can succeed. So that's what I call the motivation equation. And I call it an equation because both factors have to be present before motivation is produced. Motivation, people sometimes think of motivation as a factor, but it's not. It's a product of two precursors. The factors are value and your own expectation of success. So it's really important for a teacher or coach to set tasks for individual people that they can connect some value to. And as we saw with Amanda, it's not going to be always the same thing. You might value it because you like cars. She didn't like cars, but she got interested in her future life without oil. She also likes her father, and so she enjoyed having this little emotional interchange with her father where she actually taught him something. All those things can constitute value, and so can hanging out with your friends, and so can going outside. All these things can constitute value. But even with the value, if your expectation of success factor is 0, value times 0 is going to mean 0 motivation. And expectation of success minus value, that also won't work out. Either factor is 0, the product is going to be 0. I go into this much more in the book, but each of these 8 conditions has to do with either value or expectation of success, or sometimes both. So if you'll go to the next slide, you'll see that we've gone through the first 4 of the grade 8 conditions that motivate kids to learn. And if you haven't seen the NED talk that in which an adolescent brain known as Nedcephalus spells this out for an audience of teachers, then take a look. Just Google NED Talk, and it'll come up. NED Talk, What Kids Can Do, or you can go to the motivation equation. You can look at it, little animation, 6-minute animation in the book, right in the book, the motivation equation. And you'll see that the conditions do go on. After it stretches me, the next condition is to have a coach who will support and encourage you, break it down into steps, do it with you, show where you can get better. You have to be able to use it somehow. That is, what are you going to do with it once you know it? That can be teaching it. It can be performing it. It can be using it in a civic capacity. The seventh and most important, yes, if you Google Ned Talk grade 8, that's right. If you, the seventh condition, thinking back on it, we spoke of earlier about reflection. It's an absolutely critical step to consolidate learning, and learning will not consolidate without reflection. All of these are really rooted in science, but they're framed in Kid Talk. And finally, the last one, and some say the most important because it calls on so much of your executive function and self-regulatory functions, is I plan my next steps. What am I going to do now that I did this? What am I going to do next? And all taken together, our scientists at the University of California, San Diego National Science Foundation Science of Learning Center said, you've got it. This is it. If you have these 8 conditions, then you will have the conditions under which students, learners, any learners, kids or adults, are motivated to learn. So to learn more about this, you can hear actually students like this and more, and teachers, their teachers talking about how they have done that in their own lessons that worked best for them. And you can also hear the voices of the scientists we worked with commenting on the teacher practice and what the students said. All of that is in this highly multimedia book, which we're giving away on the web and on the iPad. If you need to get to the book, just go to motivationequation.org and you'll find links that will take you either on the website or on your iPad or iPhone if you like to read in an itty-bitty screen. So, but I do hope that you'll take a deep dive with me in person if you'd like, because I love coming together with teachers and listening to what they really are doing in their schools and helping them move it so that it's aligned with these conditions. And often it's a very modest little push that gets them to move it into the motivation range. And interestingly enough, when one does that, one also comes closer to the Common Core learning standards that we're all concerned about living up to. So I think I'll stop talking and see what you want to ask me. Thank you, Peggy. I'm really glad to hear that you read and liked the blog post. It was really fun to write also. And if anybody has a question to actually ask, and great. I'm happy to talk. Maybe Barbara or Kathleen would like to ask something.
Well, Kathleen, I'm just going to jump in. This is Barbara. And Peggy had a question at one point, and it was, I can't remember, it was Jason. And it said that school was open later for him and he felt safe there. And she brought up a question. It says, what can they do besides allowing him to stay at school longer? And there's a reason why I bring this up is because I worked at schools similar to that, and that school was the only safe place. So I'm wondering, how do we encourage a safe environment when they walk home, when they get home, things like that?
Well, I think the thing that teachers can most do to create a really supportive learning environment outside of school hours is really encourage a robust after-school program, because teachers themselves have plenty to do after school, creating their lessons for the next day and really recharging their own batteries. But after-school programs are one of the absolutely most motivating things that students can have in their lives. And a terrific after-school program that brings in strong community partners and allows students to move their bodies and try out new things that they'll never get a chance to try out in school is one of the best things that you can do. And it's supported by a very strong culture of trust that's built during the school day. Because if you're building trust during the school day through advisories and through classroom norms of feeling okay and recognizing students' social and emotional needs, then after school, when they go out to stretch their minds and their bodies with other students that they may not be in the same classes with, they're going to have this same condition of feeling okay. What Jason was experiencing, living in a rough part of town with not enough money, that's a civic problem that as teachers have a part in, but they're not the ones that need to be driving. They need to raise their voices, but it's not their responsibility. It's the civic entities, the governance. It's a governance question. So it kind of makes me mad to have have teachers feel that that's yet one more thing that they have to do. They already do so much and need so much time to do it in.
Well, you know, Kathleen, that brings up another question that was brought up, which was, what advice do you have for the teacher who wants to allow students to follow their passions in learning when they are still required to teach specific curriculum content every period of the day?
If you're talking about scripted curriculum where they're telling the teacher what to say and how many minutes to talk about it and that kind of thing, and where the books and that kind of thing are dictated, that's a really tough problem. However, even an arcane, obscure, historical incident that you're being required to cover that doesn't have any thing to do with your students' lives can be connected to another incident that does have to do with your students' lives. And it's not all about your students' lives either. It really, what you're trying to evoke in
Oops, I lost you.
school with this it matters thing, is you're trying to raise somebody's curiosity. So if there is something that you're teaching, then what you want to find is the puzzle in it or the story in it, something that allows a learner to enter it with a point of view. And once the learner has a point of view about that thing, which you can do by simply coming to the right question to ask. I say simply, but it's very deep to come out with the right question. But if you have content that you must teach, then the secret is to come up with the right question that you can ask that will suddenly make it matter to kids. So what are kids interested in? They're interested in fairness. So they're interested in puzzles. They're interested in stories. And almost anything that has happened in human history, whether it be mathematical or historical or in a book somewhere, in a novel somewhere, connects to something that has a story. And finding those stories and then extending them to things that students already have mental models for is the way you get it to matter to them. How many of you have had the experience of seeing students who really would normally say they hate Shakespeare get into it when it's about teenage love among rival gangs? Are you there? And that kind of thing is what makes things matter. We all know what I'm talking about with Romeo. So some teachers who race out They do need to be available to hear their students. That's right. And there are some students who race the kids out of the building when the school bell rings, and teachers also race out, and they may have good reason to race out. They may actually have very good reasons to. So what we need is to use the time that we have with students to be as with them as possible. And with them means making sure that you start by helping them feel okay. Moving on to figure out what matters to them, and it's an experimental process. Everybody does it with little kids all the time. Do you want to do this? Shall we try that? Well, look at this. And notice what interests them and stretches them. Make it active. Look for the thing that's just a little harder than they can do. That's the whole principle of video games. They're just a little harder, and you succeed. Usually you succeed, but 10% of the time it's a stretch for you, and that's what keeps people going. Be there as a coach for them. Be at their side, making sure that when they're asked to do something, they get a sense of how you do that thing. So they have somebody saying, yeah, that's good, now try this. Let them use it. Once they do something well, say, hey, could you go show so-and-so how to use this? Or could we go teach the 6th graders how to do this? And then allow them the time to think back on what they learned, what they would do differently. Let their reflections mean something. They don't have to be positive reflections. They might say, I was bored by this. Get them to think about why. And then get them to plan from that reflection what their next steps should be. And that really is the cycle of learning. It starts with feeling okay. It ends with reflecting back on what you did and planning your next steps. And it all is about, motivation is all about what matters to you and whether you think that you can do it, whether you expect that you can do it.
I love this, Kathleen. This is just, it seems like if we could just get everyone in teacher education programs and professional development where teachers could actually see these 8 conditions and then see how they can transform some of these lessons so they can include these things.
That's the thing. Yeah, you can. You can take a lesson that you've taught 1,000,000 times, and all you're doing is shining this light from the corner of the room. The light of the grade 8 shines on it, and it's still your lesson. You don't have to reconstruct it. But once you shine this light on it, you can make little adaptations to it that bring it into the realm where students really do want to do it and where they really will be learning.
We have just time for one more question, and it's on how do you manage it? Yeah, go ahead.
When all the students have different passions and interests in the classroom. This doesn't particularly depend on students' passions and interests. I'm interested in what students are interested in, but as long as you know that students, first of all, you can create interest in a kid by, you don't have to have an existing interest to connect it with. But if you know a lot about your students' passions and interests, that will happen naturally. I mean, when you're at a dinner party around a table with 8 people and they're all talking, you're not necessarily connecting to the passions and interests of the person who's 5 seats away from you, but that person is still having a good conversation. You just need to do it one at a time, and the tiniest things will help. The tiniest things. Think about the 4 kids that we heard talking today. Think about Amanda saying, boy, you sure taught your father something, didn't you? Yep, I guess so. And that is one thing that matters to Amanda. And all you need to do is set up some little thing that matters. And part of it is just watching them to see what matters to them in other things and then connecting it. You don't need to say, okay, we're going to have 20 different ways of doing this lesson. It's really, this is a way of reminding you that students are human too, and some things matter more than others. It doesn't have to be about a grand passion. But a student who learns math through his creating beats on his iPad, it's good. It gives them a way to think about sine waves. So just little things. And it's true also, as Mrs. Hill says, that if you have a passion, you can infect the students. Passion and zest and interest on the part of the teacher is contagious. Kids love that.
I love it too. I'm just getting all excited just listening to you. And this is, I'm concerned about the time, and I don't know if there's any other questions that people have. But this has been wonderful, Kathleen. I'm just
wonderful to meet with you all too. Terry, thank you. Peggy, thank you. And
now we're not done yet. We want to send people to we have our website that we put a guest post from Kathleen, and we also want to send you to the motivationequation.org. So I just want to make sure I can send everyone to the post. We had a guest post from Kathleen Cushman. Oh, looks like we also have Peggy put in to get to the motivation equation. So we're almost at the end, so I just wanted to thank you so much, Kathleen Cushman. Kathleen McClaskey, you can come on also.
Yeah, thanks so much, Kathleen. I have been a fan of the motivation equation when I first saw this, when it very first came out, and let people know about it. And it's one of the most engaging books I've ever read. So it's interactive. It's an iBook. Just remember that. So it's one that I would share with every colleague everywhere. So please share this out.
Thank you. I so appreciate that.
And it's you can download it for free. Kathleen Cushman made it available for everyone. We do have to go to one last slide, but if there's, thank you everybody. I want to just thank you, Kathleen Cushman, so much. It's really weird when we have two Kathleens.
It is. I want to thank Anne for her last comment here about her second grade class. So thank you, Anne, for sharing that.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm going to have to read that.
Yeah.
We do want to let you know our next webinar is just in 2 weeks. Is that right? February 4th. And it takes it the next level. It is on why hope matters. Kathleen talked about plans, but Kevin is going to talk about where learners can be able to make their reasonable goals, develop their plans to meet those goals, and then how to persist in working on those plans. So it's similar to what it kind of, we're trying to find some of these things. So I think you're going to love Kevin. Kevin knows. Isn't that right, Kathleen? You know Kevin?
Yeah. Yes. We interviewed Kevin.
He's wonderful. Yeah. He's wonderful. His schools are fantastic.
Don't you love that? I mean, you know what we might want to do is with some of the people that have been presenters, we've come bring you back as panelists, because I think, and Peggy's right, it's not just for learners; it's teachers too. We've been meeting teachers who need motivation also, and they need hope also. So,
sure.
Is there anything you'd like to end with? Kathleen Cushman?
I'd just like to thank you. I'd like to thank you for all the opportunity to meet with these people and to reach your community, and also to be part of your community. And also I'd like to thank you for your excellent technical help beforehand.
I would like to say that we're going to archive this webinar. It's going to be, if you see the link here next to the little orange recording, it's going to be on our webinar series page. And we'd like to thank Peggy George from Classroom 2.0. She's on this with us today. She will be helping us put that up in as a video, and we'll be able to embed it on that site for you. And we're also going to archive the chat. So everyone who's been putting things in the chat will be able to collect those also. So we really, really appreciate you, Peggy. Thank you, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Peggy, for all your support and great questions, and always there for us.
And Kathleen Cushman, you are just such a gem. We are very, very honored that you gave us this time and are sharing so much. This is so wonderful.
Okay, well, thank you so much for everything, and I hope everybody makes it through the storm, and I'll see you next time.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Good.
Thank you, Kathleen.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
everyone.
So I think we are ready to